In today's video, the 10 most controversial, divisive, strife-inducing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. These are the cards that basically tore the community in half. Things that some people thought, this is a good card, or this is a necessary evil, and some people who said, this is why this game is dying. So, let's hop right in. Card number 1, Brilliant Fusion. This is a card that's controversial for a couple of reasons. Some people feel like it is a Gem Knight support card and it kind of sucks that it ends up in decks other than Gem Knights. Some people hate it because they feel like it's broken and creates too much free advantage. Some people hate it because it means you have to run things like Gem Knight Garnet. And it really sort of sparked this whole debate about, Garnet cards. Like you literally hear certain cards being called a Garnet. So what do I mean by that? With Brilliant Fusion, you run 3 copies of Brilliant Fusion and you usually run 1 to 2 copies of Gem Knight Garnet. The idea is that you want to see Brilliant Fusion as early as possible, preferably in your opening hand, so that you can use it. The problem though, is that for Brilliant Fusion to work, you have to run a Gem Knight card, which means that you have to run, the best vanilla level 4 Gem Knight that there is, Garnet. If you draw your single copy of Garnet though, before you draw Brilliant Fusion, then Brilliant Fusion's dead. If you draw Brilliant Fusion and use it, that's good, now the remaining copies in your deck are dead. If you want to decrease the likelihood of the first thing happening, it means you need to run like 2 copies of Garnet. But if you run 2 copies of Garnet, then that could mean potential dead draws. And if you still draw those 2 before you draw Brilliant Fusion, then you see where this issue goes on and on and on and on. So, Brilliant Fusion has been a very controversial card. It's really torn players. Some people say that, they'll never run something like that. They don't like the idea of having to run these Garnets. And this is kind of, flowed over into other cards. I think the Predaplant Engine, for example, is another great example where, you have to run like the 3-0 for Scorpio, but you also have to run the Darling Cobra. If you draw Cobra, it's useless. That's just one example. So yeah, definitely the Brilliant Fusion engine. Second card, That Grass Looks Greener. So, what's this card all about? Lets you mill a load of cards all at once. It was released earlier this year to the, much pleasure of a lot of honestly gimmicky fun decks. Things like Infernoids, things like Skull Servants, things like Lightsworns. But some people felt like just the card design and mechanics of it were so broken. I mean, I guess, of course, it involves you having to stop and count your deck out and your opponent having to count their deck, and that takes a lot of time. But some people just felt like for the card to be at 3 was overwhelmingly powerful and skewed, gameplay too much. It's like it punished you for running 40 cards and, things like that, and just kind of created all these unnecessary complications. Some people thought that the card should be banned because we saw the advent of a lot of grass decks, the zombie decks with like Fairy Tale Snow and lots of Mizukis, and these decks just kind of create overwhelming amounts of advantage. The card eventually got limited, and you'll see a lot of people who complain. They think that the card was fine and they're mad that it got limited, but then you see people who are like, yes, this is perfect, this is where it needs to be. So it's definitely a card I've seen a lot of different opinions on, so that's what made it on the list. Next up is Karnamies, a card that is, it's no one really talks too much about it now, but in its heyday, this thing was really something a lot of people wanted to see banned. They felt like it gave too much advantage to stun decks. They felt like it was too much of an enabler for those just trap-heavy stun decks. Some people call those like helmet decks or whatever. Decks that run just a lot of traps, a lot of anti-meta stun cards, barrier statues, or what's the card? The one that Banisher of the Radiance, things like Thunder King, Cleaforts, or Yosenju's, decks like that can abuse this card really easily, and it's a huge plus. It's even more than a pot of greed if you play it properly. It can be like a +2. I've seen people who wanted this card, banned. This needs to go. It's unfair. However, the card is still around. I don't think that currently it's all that broken. You'll still hear people who disagree. Some people just hate it because they can't afford it. But the fact of the matter is, Karnamies has been a very controversial, divisive card. Super boss monsters. So Cleafort Towers is, most known because it was part of an actually really popular meta deck. When this card got summoned, it couldn't be affected by anything. It's unaffected by spells, traps, monster effects of anything that's, like a lower level than it, and it has a lot of attack and, it makes your opponent get rid of cards. This sparked a series, honestly, of monsters like Super Quantal Great Magnus, or Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon, or most recently Masterpiece. These kind of unremovable boss monsters almost. Things that were so hard to out, and people really hated this. There were some people who thought, okay, it's okay, you just play the outs to it. For example, with Cleefort Towers, it was like Diamond Crab King or Heroic Champion Excalibur if your deck could play those cards. But some people thought, no, this isn't fair. This Yu-Gi-Oh! Should not be about summoning a boss monster that's impossible to get rid of. You know, boss monsters are okay, they should be very powerful and hard to get out, but they shouldn't be actually like unable to be removed from the field. And obviously, Cleefort Towers eventually got banned. None of the other super boss monsters yet have even gotten banned though. Masterpiece, for example, is notably still around at 3. So it's tough to say if these cards are good or bad for the game, but Towers like definitely started that conversation. And it's actually a great segue into the next card, or cards, which is Kaijus. So these are a really hot point of contention. The same people who complain so much about Cleefort Towers kind of like the idea of Kaijus. It's an easy way to out troublesome monsters on the board. Things like Darklaw, all those negators like Crystal Wing, Totally Awesome, Cyber Dragon Infinity, Invoked Mechaba, you know, and so on and so forth. The cards that just really can negate so many things and be so tough to get off the board, you can just use a Kaiju. It tributes your opponent's monster, literally like as just part of summoning it. It cannot be negated, it's not a monster effect. So, great, easy way to out bosses. But then some people hate that because you put so much effort into summoning your deck's powerful boss monster and it can just get Kaiju'd, simple as that. That really sucks, you know, and especially for lower tier decks that have to actually put a lot of resources and time and stuff into getting out a certain boss monster only for it to just bloop, you know, give me a seal, have fun. Yeah, not really a popular concept. Some people say that Kaijus were the necessary evil to counter the power creep of monsters that like couldn't be targeted and negated everything. Other people said that's not fair. And the worst part about Kaijus is it's really hard to actually deal with them on a ban list because there's like 6 of them. So you can't, I mean, you have to ban them all, and that's not something that I think Konami's gonna do. Currently, you don't hear as much talk about them, but it's definitely been a really divisive point in the community. Next card is Maxy. So this is a fun one because a lot of people think that this card should be banned. A lot of people think that this card should be at 3. A lot of people think that, you know, it should be somewhere in between. Maxy is a very simple but oddly powerful card. You discard it and then you draw for every card your opponent special summons in the turn. It sounds, you know, on paper like it's not too great, but it's really powerful. When you drop it in the middle of an opponent's combo, or really kind of at the start of an opponent's combo, they're forced to make a decision. Do they continue with their combo and let you draw 3, 4, potentially 5, 6, 7, 8 cards? Or do they stop right there? And in that way, it's actually better than a lot of cards like Effect Veiler at the time, or you know, even newer things like Ash Blossom or Ghost Ogre, because it can kind of just halt an opponent's turn entirely or punish them for taking their turn. And a lot of people hate it because now that it's at 1, if one person draws it and the other person doesn't draw it, then the person who drew it is at a huge advantage. Similar to a card that I didn't include on this list, but is, you know, notable, and that's Vanity's Emptiness. So, you know, some people think that for that reason Maxy should be banned because it's so polarizing for the person who sees it. Some people think it should be at 3 because that way both players have access to 3 copies of it. Either way though, it's one of those things that's really frustrating to lose against, and so that's why it's been a big part of the conversation. Next card, Dimensional Barrier. So in sort of lieu of cards that stop your opponent from doing things, Dimensional Barrier is another thing that can kind of halt a turn. You flip it, you call a summoning type, and your opponent can't use that summoning type for the turn. And monsters of that type get their effects negated. So, you know, literally you can flip this on a Performer Pal Skull Crobat Joker, for example, or a Harmonizing Magician or whatever, doesn't get its effect, and they also don't get to, you know, Pendulum Summon that turn. Same thing goes for Rituals, Fusions, Synchros, and Z's. This card single-handedly shut out a lot of decks. Against Burning Abyss or Zodiacs, for example, no more Xyz summoning. Your turn kind of ends. Against, let's say it was used against Necroz, that would mean like no ritual summons. Against Shaddolls, that would mean no fusion summoning. And that's really like overbearing. I mean, some people say that this card is a necessary evil, like the Kaiju argument or something, where it's how you have to be able to stand up to these powerful decks that can pump out these huge boards. Other people say that's not fair. One trap should not have the power to literally just end your opponent's turn. I mean, at least with Solemn cards, it negates one action, but it doesn't just halt your opponent's turn entirely. So this is a card that for a long time was also hidden behind a paywall, and we all know that never makes things more likable in the player's eyes. So yeah, Dimensional Barrier, big point of contention. Next card's Heavy Storm. This is one that It's banned now, so you know, there's not a lot to say about it. But it does open the conversation of what's a healthy amount of spell and trap removal. Should Heavy Storm be this thing? Because like it's a Saki card, right? When you activate Heavy Storm, you destroy all the spells and traps in the field. So if your opponent set a lot of traps to help them stop your plays and disrupt you and counter you, and they get Heavy Stormed, it really sucks. So some people would say then that Heavy Storm is a good check in the game. It keeps your opponent honest. It keeps them from having to set, you know, or from being able to comfortably set a lot of cards and just sit behind loads of back row. Other people felt like this is super Saki. This conversation is actually kind of carried over into things like Twin Twisters and things like Heavy Storm Duster to a lesser degree, where it's like how much spell and trap removal is healthy to have in the game. And also, I mean, we have cards like Raigeki and Darkhold legal, but things like Heavy Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster are still banned. In my opinion, I think that they should stay banned. I think that they are more powerful for the reasons I've said, but a lot of people will disagree and think that Heavy Storm is just like a good player check, you know? So it's another one of those cards that really has a lot of talks, has a lot of people divided, thought deserved a spot. Next card, Evenly Matched. This card is a new addition to the game, and in its just earliest use, like YCS Dallas, YCS London, it's made a huge impact. It's a trap with some of the weirdest mechanics I think I've ever really seen in like a just sort of staple card like this. Letting you, you know, use it from your hand if you don't have any cards and force your opponent to banish cards from their field face down until they have the same amount as you, which basically will pull them down to having only one card. And this is like forcing your opponent banish face down. I want to repeat that point because that is non-targeting removal that like gets rid of cards permanently, and it's so easy to use, you know, like you just kind of have it and you go to your battle phase and you use it and your opponent loses everything. Then you just kind of get to continue as you want. Some would say that this promotes, you know, healthy controlled play. It makes people play better. They don't need to commit all their stuff to the board and be reckless because they can get punished for it. Others say, no, that's bullshit. That's ridiculous that I get punished for playing the game and just doing the things I'm supposed to do, and then suddenly out of nowhere, evenly matched, bam. And you know, there are certain decks that are extremely, you know, susceptible to it, like a lot of pendulum decks, for example, or any decks that use like lots of, you know, continuous spells and traps. This will just blow them out of the water. It's new. It kind of remains to be seen how powerful it ends up. Some people say that, you know, not only is it a necessary evil, some people even say that it's not that good of a card. It's easy to play around. It's easy, you know, it's easily telegraphed, which I can agree with. And there are some counterplays to it, like set rotation, although they got limited, so hard to say. But I do think it's going to go down as a very controversial card and might even find its way on the ban list one day. And the final card, I'm sure you can imagine which one this will be, Pot of Desires. A card that I have, by experience, seen can literally tear a community in two. I mentioned this on live streams. Some people love it, some people hate it. I mentioned it on social media. Some people love it, some people hate it. This card, it's got all sorts of crazy connotations. It's the new Pot of Greed. It's incredible. It's a neg 9. This is horrible card design. Why would you run such a stupid card? I've literally seen comments saying that like they'll dislike a video or unsubscribe from a channel because like a deck profile or something says you should use Pot of Desires. This is a card where, I mean, I don't know. I've made videos about it where I think that you know, I think Pot of Desire is a pretty good card. I think that everybody should at least give it a try. I think it's worth a look and it helps a lot of decks. Some people disagree with me. Some people think that this is a neg 9, it's horrible, you shouldn't lose so much of your deck. They will not look at this card. They can't be asked to play it. I don't know. I'm not gonna go much further into the debate. I'm not gonna say anyone's like right or wrong, but Pot of Desires has been, in my opinion, the most divisive card in like recent memory that Yu-Gi-Oh's had. So that's the video. I hope you guys liked it. I thought this would be just kind of an interesting thing to talk about, and maybe it'll start some more flame wars in the comments or something, but yeah, these are the cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think have just really torn the community apart. Some still do. What are your stances on a lot of these cards? Do you think that they're healthy, good additions to the game? You know, necessary evils, whatever? Do you think that some of these cards are ridiculously broken, should have never been created, need to be banned? I have at it. So that's the video. Hope you guys liked it. Give it a thumbs if you liked it, and make sure that you subscribe, hit the bell, join the notification squad. Gonna be doing a giveaway real soon for the Spirit Warriors box. So subscribe and make sure that you stick around so you can hear more details about that when it happens. That's gonna be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.